attorneys track when they were prosecuting a parent or legal guardian who had been separated from their child? There's only one answer to this. It's gone through the courts.
You know, did we track it?
Did you track when you were prosecuting a parent or legal guardian who had been separated from a child?
I don't believe we were tracking that.
You were not tracking it. That is the correct answer. And when parents are prosecuted and sentenced, they are in DOJ custody, correct?
Correct. They are their custody is transferred to the U.S. Marshals.
So these parents were in your custody. Your attorneys are prosecuting them, and your department was not tracking parents who were separated from their children. Do you know what kind of damage has been done to children and families across this country? Children who will never get to see their parents again. Do you understand the magnitude of that?
I understand that the policy zero tolerance.
Has the Justice Department started tracking parents and legal guardians who were separated from their children on the board?
Come on.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Come on. Out.
Congresswoman, I appreciate your passion for this issue. I know that you've been very...
Don't share shit, dude. You did it.
This is about more than my passion. This is about the children's future, Mr.
Go on.
Whitaker.
Out. You can't just lay there. It doesn't work that way. Come on, out.
Responsibility
Out.
for the arrest, the detention,
Thank you.
and together with the custody of the children was handled by DHS and HHS before those people were ever transferred to DOJ custody through the U.S. Marshals.
Thank you. The time of the gentlelady has expired. Ms. Nemes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, I spent 27 years in law enforcement. I served as the chief of police. I took an oath just like you did. And I took that oath very, very seriously to uphold the Constitution and to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I hope you took the oath that you took very, very seriously. But today, as I've said through, and my colleagues right, this has been painful because I believe that you have worked to make our criminal justice system, to make a mockery out of it. And it's painful for me for you to do that, and anybody up to and including the President of the United States. But let me ask you this, and it's really been painful for someone who has been given so much responsibility, representing the men and women who have dedicated their lives to public service. That really means a lot to me. I hope it means a lot to you. Mr. Lieu asked you if you ever prove it. Mr. Lieu asked you if you ever communicated with President Trump about investigations in the Southern District of New York. Instead of answering, you referred him back to your statement. Referred him back to what was written for you. But all you said is that you didn't make in your statement, that you didn't make any promises or commitments to President Trump. I want to know whether you talked to President Trump at all about the Southern District of New York's case involving Michael Cohen.
Congresswoman, as I've mentioned several times today, I am not going to discuss my private conversations with the President of the United States.
So yes or no, did you? Yes or no, did you discuss with the President Trump anything about Michael Cohen?
Congresswoman, as I have expressed several times today, I am not.
Did you ever have any conversations with the President about firing or reassigning any personnel, U.S. attorneys or others, who work with the Southern District of New York? With the President or anybody? Anybody at all? Did you ever have any conversations with anybody about reassigning or firing any personnel, including U.S. attorneys for the Southern District of New York?
Congresswoman, I sit on top of the Department of Justice, as you mentioned.
Did you ever have any conversations about anybody who works with the District of Virginia firing or reassigning? With anybody, not just the President, anybody at all?
Congresswoman, I'm not going to talk.
Okay, so let's talk about the great 115,000 men and women who work for the Department of Justice, because I agree that they, in your words, extremely talented, highly principled public servants who are dedicated to upholding our great Constitution and the laws of the United States. I'm sure you're familiar with this because you keep up. At a rally last fall, the President being exposed at the Department of Justice and the FBI. You have some real bad ones. You see what's happened at the FBI. They're all gone. They're all gone, but there's a lingering stench. And we're going to get rid of that too. Do you agree with the President's characterization of the Department of Justice and the FBI? As the Attorney General, please tell me why you would agree or why you would not agree with that statement.
Congresswoman, since I've become the acting Attorney General, I have reestablished a positive relationship between the Department of Justice and the White House.
Before you established that positive relationship, what was your opinion of the 115,000 men and women who dedicate their life to public service? Before you had your current position, what was your opinion of them?
I have actually a very high estimation of the men and women at the Department of Justice. They are the most exceptional, hardworking people that I have ever.
So you disagree with the President's characterization because they don't deserve it, Mr. Whitaker, and you are here. You supervise, you manage them. You don't agree with the President's characterization of them. Is that correct?
Listen, before, Congresswoman, in all due respect, I feel very strongly that as the acting Attorney General of the United States, that I have to set the tone for the entire Department of Justice. And what is so important.
If I worked for you, Mr. Whitaker, and you thought I was highly principled and very talented, and that was your answer when I was asked, or you're asked about how do you view the people who work for you, that's your answer, that's pretty pitiful. Let me ask you this. You've only mentioned drugs coming through the southern border, the problem at the southern border as characterized by you and the President. Could you please paint a picture of drugs flowing through our ports of entry? Because I'm told the overwhelming number or percentage of drugs that flow into our country come through the ports of entry. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? And if so, yes or no, why not?
Witness may answer the question.
Congresswoman, we actually both agree. The ports of entry at our southern border are most trafficked with drugs and illegality. It also comes in between ports.
Overwhelming of drugs come through the ports of entry. Do you
Our southern border, yes.
agree or disagree with that?
I believe that a tremendous amount of drugs come through the ports of entry on the southern border, yes.
Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, sir. Wanted to ask you about your enforcement priorities. One of my jobs here in Congress is to serve on the Department of Homeland Security. And within that job, one of my most critical jobs is to make sure our citizens are safe, to protect our nation against terrorist threats. In May of 2017, a joint FBI-DHS bulletin warned of a growing threat of violence posed by white supremacists, neo-Nazis, right-wing extremists, and other white nationalist groups. An extensive study of terrorist plots between 2008 and 2016 found that plots and attacks by white nationalist groups in the U.S. outnumber threats by Islamic extremists 2 to 1. White supremacist groups have been aggressively recruiting into college campuses, and violent incidents involving these groups have more than tripled since 2017. More than 100 people have been killed or injured since 2014, and more than 60 in 2017 alone by these alt-right groups. Sir, just very basic question. Do you believe that white nationalism, white supremacists, extremists, or right-wing groups in this country pose a threat?
Yes, I do.
Is it growing?
Based on that report issued by the FBI, I have no reason, as I sit here today, to disagree with it.
Do you believe that the administration is placing enough of an emphasis, enough resources allocated, dedicated to stopping these kinds of homegrown terrorist attacks?
I believe that we are dedicating resources to the appropriate threats. That is done obviously below my role. It's done mostly at the line and the management level at the FBI and our other agencies, including our partners at DHS, as you mentioned. And I really, as I sit here today, I think we are adequately addressing the threats that we face, but we are always reallocating resources based on how those threats evolve.
Adequately addressing the threat, and you mentioned earlier in your opening statement 30 convictions, hate crime convictions. Yet in 2017, an increase of 17% hate crimes reported, which they're usually underreported in this country. More than 7,000 hate crimes in 2017, and you have 30 convictions. Do you think you're allocating adequate resources towards prosecuting hate crimes?
I do, and if you look at some of the high-profile cases we've done, like the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, or the Charlottesville situation that we previously discussed, or even the case where we sent a prosecutor to my home state of Iowa to help prosecute a state hate crime. I think we have addressed hate crime.
If you look at the numbers, 7,000 reported, almost 20% increase in 2017, 30 convictions. Adequate?
Congressman, we always work with our state partners and the local police to determine where's the best place, the most effective place to prosecute a crime. And so to suggest that somehow that those victims of those crimes don't receive the proper justice, I think would be
I think I'm looking at it from relative. We're looking at foreign terrorism, and yet are we ignoring domestic terrorism?
No, we are not ignoring
So
that.
are we allocating the equal or more resources to domestic versus foreign? Yes or no? Or
Congressman, we allocate our resources based upon the threats and where the federal government should deploy those resources. And again, it's a very dynamic, daily evaluation as to where the threats are, and I believe that we are adequately resourcing all of the threats, including the ones you described.
do you think domestic terrorism from white extremist groups is on the rise? And do you think we should allocate additional resources to combating these kinds of terrorist attacks in this country?
Congressman, I believe I already answered this question, but I just want to be clear. I agree with the FBI's
I'm
assessment.
sorry, I didn't hear your answer.
Okay, well, I believe with the FBI statement that those crimes are on the rise. I also believe that we have adequately deployed our resources on a daily basis, dynamically, as required by those threats. And I have seen it based on my intelligence briefings that I participate on almost a daily basis, and I know that the FBI and the other federal law enforcement agencies are adequately resourcing these threats in addition to all the other threats we face. It is a target-rich environment when it comes to law enforcement and making sure...
Sir, I'm running out of time. I'm going to say we're going to continue to look at this in Homeland Security because I believe that we're missing the ball here. In 2017, DHS terminated grant funding to look at some of these issues of domestic terrorism. We have to keep addressing this issue. Lives, the safety of our citizens is at stake. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Ms. Scanlon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Whitaker.
Good afternoon.
In response to a question from my Pennsylvania colleague, you mentioned that the Department of Justice has been attempting to withhold federal dollars from so-called sanctuary cities. Is that right?
Well, yes, I talked about the burn jag grants.
Thank you. And one of those cities is Philadelphia, right?
I believe so, yes.
I happen to represent Philadelphia. Isn't it true that Judge Mike Bailson of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania ruled that the Department of Justice's attempt to withhold this money was illegal and unconstitutional?
Congresswoman, that is the...
Isn't it correct that that was the ruling of the federal court?
Congresswoman,
Isn't it
I am not
correct
going to
that that was
discuss
the
an
ruling?
ongoing litigation.
Isn't it correct that the federal court ruled that the Department of Justice's action was illegal and unconstitutional? That's a matter of public record, sir. Is it correct?
Congresswoman, I don't disagree
Mr.
that a
Whitaker,
district
you
court
may be confused here. This may appear to be a contact sport, but it's not a gridiron, and I'm not letting you run out the time, okay? Isn't it true the federal court ruled that that was illegal and unconstitutional?
Congresswoman, again,
Okay, I'll take that as a
subject of
yes.
ongoing litigation.
Isn't it also true, Mr. Whitaker? Mr. Whitaker, I'm asking the question. Isn't it also true that the court found that the Department of Justice had not produced any credible evidence that undocumented immigrants committed crime at a higher rate than any other group?
Congresswoman, this is the subject of ongoing litigation.
Isn't it true that the federal court found that in a public opinion?
Congresswoman, I am not going to comment.
Okay, I'll take that as a yes as well. Let's move on to some other questions. And just to be clear, I'm asking oversight questions about your enforcement priorities during your tenure, okay, at the Department of Justice. I want to make sure we're clear on when that tenure began. I have a date of September 22nd, 2017 that you became Chief of Staff. Is that correct?
That is incorrect.
Okay, when is your first working date as Chief of Staff for Attorney General?
I started at the Department of Justice on October 4th of 2017.
Okay. And then you became acting Attorney General as of November 7th, 2018?
The President tweeted that I was going to be the next acting Attorney General on November 7th of 2018. The order that I have received from the President has the date of November 8th of 2018.
Okay, do you have a copy of that order?
I do have a copy of that order.
Can you provide it to the committee, please?
I'd be happy to. I don't have it with me, no pictures.
Okay, that'd be wonderful. Turning to some other enforcement priorities. On December 22nd, 2017, the Department of Justice issued a formal request to the Census Bureau asking for an addition to the census of a question asking about citizenship status.
That's why I got rid of my fucking Skytrack. It's bullshit like that.
To draft that request?
Congressman, the department is currently defending the Census Bureau in litigation on this issue
General
across the country.
Sessions asked, or are you refusing to answer the question?
I think it's inappropriate for me to comment about the subject of ongoing litigation.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reflect that Mr. Whitaker hasn't answered the question, and I'd ask this matter to be addressed in the upcoming deposition. Let's see. Do you know if the President directed Department of Justice lawyers to make that request?
Congresswoman, this is the subject of ongoing litigation.
Okay, so you're not going to
We are
answer that
currently
question?
defending the United States court.
Thank you. Was Acting Assistant Attorney General John Gore involved in the drafting of that request to add the census question?
Congresswoman, as I've previously stated, this is the subject of ongoing litigation.
Okay, so we'll let the record reflect
Census
that
Bureau.
again, you're refusing to answer the question. Okay, we can agree that one of the functions of the Department of Justice is to enforce the Voting Rights Act, correct?
Correct. One of the
Okay,
jobs.
thank you. And isn't it also true that the most recent Voting Rights Act enforcement action was filed on January 10th, 2017?
As I've mentioned previously, the department
Is it correct that the most recent Voting Rights Enforcement Act action filed by your department was in 2017, January 10th?
Congresswoman, I'll give you an
It's a
example
yes
where
or no
during
question.
the first term of the Obama administration, they filed, I believe,
Okay, reclaiming my time,
voting.
no running out the clock. I'll
Answer
refer,
your question.
Chairman, if we can, enter into the record the Department of Justice website, which reflects when the last Voting Rights Act case was filed, January 10th, 2017.
Without objection, the fact that that is noted on the website will be entered into the record.
Thank you. Isn't it true that under the Trump administration, the Department of Justice has reversed its position on at least 3 important Voting Rights Act cases?
May I answer the question? I see my time is
I
expired.
think there's a yes or a no.
The Department of Justice.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
The Department of Justice has changed positions only in one voting case, and that's the Houston case. The Supreme Court agreed with our new reading of the statute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have about 4 documents that I ask for unanimous consent to be entered into the record. The first one is titled Crime and Murder in 2018 and Preliminary Analysis. The second one reads, Communities have lower crime rates. The third one reads, Amid crisis rhetoric, local leaders defend border region from misconceptions. And this is a report from the Riverine Valley in Texas. And then the last one is Progressive Times, Mission, Texas, Sheriff. Crime dropped 10% in Ruidago in last year.
Without objection, these documents will be entered into the record. The gentlelady is now recognized for 5 minutes.
So, Mr. Attorney General, what is it in your mind that leads you to conclude that the border region is crime-ridden? And these documents that I just entered the record clearly show that Del Rio, Brownsville, El Paso, all the areas in the border region, and in fact even El Paso is listed in the top 29 cities where crime has gone down that you quoted in your written testimony. If all of these stats show differently, why are you so insistent that this is a crime-ridden area? And I just, please, a short answer because I've only got 5 minutes.
I don't recall saying today that the border region is crime-ridden, but I will answer your question as fulsomely as I can. And that is that illegal immigration through our southern border is dramatically and negatively impacting the crime rate in our cities. It would be lower if we didn't have illegal immigration. I point to the example of Molly
So
Tibbet.
you're talking about other cities, not the cities there, in fact, in the border areas.
Well, I think you would agree with me that most illegal immigrants that come in through our southern border don't reside at the border region, that they transit through there, then make their way to other parts of our country.
Well, I know many come to Houston because we've got good jobs and we're an open city. But I heard you say earlier, and maybe the word crime-ridden was not the exact word you used, but it was alluding to the fact that the border areas had a lot of crime. And I just simply don't agree with you. But let me move on to another topic in following up with some questions about the family separation policy, zero tolerance policy. You said earlier in answering a question about some of your background that you were by a General Sessions side for 4 years side by side, and you were aware of everything in the Justice Department separation policy. Is that true?
I served as Chief of Staff for 13 months, and I'm familiar with the zero tolerance policy, yes.
Well, but you said you were with him side by side, so can you tell us if you were in the room when it happened, when the actual zero tolerance policy was hatched?
I participated in discussions about the zero tolerance policy internally, but again, I'm not going to talk about the internal deliberations. The decision was to issue a zero tolerance policy.
Yeah, who is the brainchild of the policy? Who hatched it? I mean, where did it come from? We've never had it before, and to the level that it's being executed now.
It was General Sessions' decision to implement, and he signed the memo implementing it and distributed that to our border district U.S. attorneys.
All right, so let me go on and ask this question. How many children are still separated from their families as we sit here today?
That's a number that only DHS and HHS would know. As I sit here, the Department of Justice isn't involved in handling children that are encountered at the border, whether it's a family unit or as unaccompanied minors.
So you have no idea how many children might be. You've not seen any documents, pressure tests from DHS or ORR or anybody else.
Again, those are different departments within the.
No, I know that, sir, but I know that you're the acting attorney general, and you get a lot of reports, a lot of documents, a lot of data. You've not seen anything to give us any idea just how many children have been torn away from the arms of their mothers.
No, I would have to refer you to HHS and DHS again.
Do you know how many have been reunited with their families?
Again, Congresswoman, those are not statistics that I'm involved in because those cases.
Again, you don't have to be the one to break the little finger sticks counting the children. I just want to know if you've seen anything cross your desk or any member of your staff, so that Americans who are just find this policy to be abhorrent and inhumane, they have an idea as to when the children will ever be reunited with their families. You cannot tell us that today.
No, I would have to refer you to HHS and DHS, which would be responsible for the parts of the process. Because once we receive individuals for prosecution under the zero tolerance policy, we only deal with the adults.
All right, one last question since we're running out of time. At the State of the Union, the President said that he was going to make, and a priority to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions were protected. Does that mean that you're going to drop all the ACA litigation that you're involved in?
As you know, Congresswoman, that the Affordable Care Act litigation is ongoing.
Well, I know that. The question is, are you going to be willing to settle it, or are you going to be able to drop some of that since the President is changing priorities and direction for his Department of Justice?
Yeah. Time of the gentlelady's expired. The witness may answer the question.
We have a unitary executive, and if the President sets a policy and issues a policy directive, we will follow that policy.
Thank you.
Mr. Neguse.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being here. I also want to thank my colleague, the distinguished gentleman from South Dakota, Nevin Senadau, for his support of criminal justice reform, and looking forward to working with him.
North Dakota, my apologies.
look forward to working with my criminal justice. I want to talk about another policy matter with respect to cannabis. I represent the state of Colorado. In Colorado, recreational use of marijuana was legalized in 2014. Today, more than half the states have legalized either the recreational or medical use of marijuana. Researchers at the University of Colorado, which I'm proud to represent, are working hard to understand the health effects. They're studying promising approaches that use marijuana to relieve chronic pain and the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. In August of 2016, I understand this is before you were at the Department of Justice, Mr. Attorney General, the DEA took a big step towards improving scientific research on marijuana when it submitted a request in the Federal Register for applications to produce federally approved research-grade marijuana. Several institutions have submitted an application that have yet to receive a response. What is the status of those applications, if you might know, and do you know if the Department of Justice and the DEA intend to support legitimate cannabis research that can help protect the health and safety of our citizens?
For the 3 months that I've been the acting Attorney General, this is an issue that I've been aware of, and I've actually tried to get the expansion and the applications out. We've run into a very complicated matter regarding a treaty that we're trying to work around. We have some international treaty obligations that may not allow the way that marijuana has to be handled from the research facilities to the researchers and the grow facility to the researchers. So it is something that I am very aware of. It's something I'm trying to push. Unfortunately, I have 6 days left in this chair at the most. I don't know if I'm going to successfully get to it, but I understand the concern and know that we're trying to make it work.
I appreciate that and I applaud that. And if I could get your assurances that within the 6 days, if you could just follow up with the department staff and follow up with our office in writing, it'd be incredibly helpful for us as folks reach out.
Yeah, we'll try to get an answer as to the current status, but my recollection of where I last found it is that the...
Sure, no, that's sufficient. I want to make sure thank you, Mr. Attorney General. You mentioned earlier that the public essentially learned that Attorney General Sessions was fired on November 7th, 2018 by tweet, and you were appointed via that same tweet. When did you first learn that Mr. Sessions was fired, or would be fired?
Again.
I learned on November 7th, if that's your question. I mean,
it is.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you learned by virtue of that same tweet that we all learned?
I mean, I would suggest the only point I'd put on that, Congressman, I'm sorry to interrupt, but is that Mr. Sessions resigned, sent in his resignation letter.
Understand. So did you have any conversations with folks at the White House prior to November 7th, 2018 about Attorney General Sessions resigning or being fired, however you would characterize that? As
is the long-standing practice of the Department of Justice and the executive branch generally, the President's entitled to confidential communications, and while I'm not confirming or denying the existence of any conversation, I'm not going to talk about my private conversations with the President of the United States.
We will follow up on that front. With respect, I would ask the Chairman to take that up in a deposition to the extent that one is noticed. Question around, you mentioned earlier in some of your testimony around the reasoning behind your appointment, that one of the reasons you believed in your view that you were appointed was to the position of Acting Attorney General was your experience as a former U.S. Attorney, correct?
Yeah, correct. I spent 5.5 years as the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa.
Yes, sir. And you also mentioned that one of the reasons in your view that you believed you were appointed Acting Attorney General was that you've been at the Department of Justice for the last year or so, working as the Chief of Staff to Attorney General Sessions, side by side, I think you mentioned.
Yes, and I knew all of the active matters that we weren't accused from, obviously. I knew all the policies that we had not only implemented, but that were in progress. I knew all the people and the individuals, both inside the Department of Justice and the interagency.
Understand. I just want to reclaim my time here. So I appreciate that, and I guess the question I have is, I'm sure you're aware that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is a former U.S. Attorney, that he also has been at the Department of Justice, that he knows the people, he knows the matters, and then under the vacancy, he was next in line in succession to be appointed Attorney General in the occasion in which that office was vacant, occasioned by Mr. Sessions' termination or resignation or what have you. And so I'm trying to understand why. I mean, were you surprised that you were appointed rather than Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, that the ordinary rules of succession weren't followed?
It's been an honor of a lifetime to serve as the Acting Attorney General, and I have, as I mentioned, 6 days left, and I'm going to take full advantage of that, including enjoying this hearing. But there are 2 different statutes that apply to the vacancy that was created by General Sessions' letter of resignation, and one was the succession statute by the Department of Justice, and as you know, the other one is the Vacancy Reform Act, which has been passed by Congress. And so my appointment, as is outlined in the 20-page OLC opinion is legitimate and has precedent.
And I'm not, with respect to Attorney General, I was not referencing the legitimacy of the appointment. What I was saying is under the Vacancies Act, 28 U.S.C. 508, the Deputy Attorney General is the first assistant to the Attorney General, and so therefore would be the appropriate designee to fill that role. But with that, I yield back to
The gentleman yields it back. McBath.
Mr. Chairman? Yes. I just wanted to address that issue really quickly, just so we're all on the same page. The first assistant, together with any other Senate-confirmed individual, together with anyone that served 90 days or less, 365 days at a senior position, is eligible to be. And there's no ranking or hierarchy of those three positions. Obviously, I'm in the third bucket as Chief of Staff. I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Thank you. Ms. McBath.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, I'm completely aware that North Carolina and Georgia were dealing with similar problems with voter suppression, and I can actually tell you I witnessed voter suppression in Georgia, even as I was running in my own election. Is it fair to say that the department was not remotely interested in securing the elections in North Carolina, rather that its intent was abusing its subpoena powers and wielding its mandate to protect our elections in a thinly veiled effort to suppress minority elections and populations?
The Department of Justice is committed to upholding the voting rights of all Americans.
I understand that. But what I need you to clarify for me is what actions were taken for all of the voting rights to be upheld. Because you stated earlier, your statement earlier was that you were side by side with with Attorney General Sessions, advising him on all aspects of the department. Yet you don't know, but at this point you're saying you don't appear that you do not suspect that there was any voter suppression. So what I'm asking is that, do you not know of any voter suppression, or do you not know whether or not those laws are being enforced?
I don't believe I said that I'm aware that there might have been voter suppression. Did I? Is that something you heard me say?
No, I'm just asking you, might it be the case that you were not aware of any voter suppression?
Well, the Department of Justice, I sit atop a massive organization, as you can imagine, and cases regarding suppression, voter fraud, or really any enforcement of the voting rights or other statutes is done by U.S. attorneys and FBI agents that are in the district doing those cases. And so it would be unusual that I would have specific knowledge about any of the evidence in those cases. So
really,
obviously,
that's beautiful.
Our cases free of political interference, and if there's evidence of, as you suggest, voter suppression, and we can predicate an investigation, that is something we'll seriously look at.
So did the department assess the need for election monitors in the 2019 elections?
Oh, fuck.
I think I mentioned in my opening statement that we sent out
11%. Ouch.
35
hello, baby.
civil rights divisions.
Yeah, not very well.
To, I believe, 19 states, if I remember right. I might be wrong. I refer you back to my statement, but we did send out election monitors from the civil rights.
Because I was in Georgia, and I can tell you, I saw the problems, but I didn't see the election monitors. Did you send any that you're aware of?
As I sit here today, I don't know if Georgia received what I'm describing. Obviously, the civil rights division would have determined where those assets could be deployed. I know in the 2004 election, when I was U.S. Attorney, the civil rights division sent, I think, 3 or 4 lawyers to my office to monitor the elections in Des Moines. So I wouldn't be surprised that they did send election monitors to Georgia.
I'll send it right now.
I really think that we needed them, and I'm very disappointed in the numbers that we received. We needed far more help than we got. But also on February 1st, the committee sent you a letter asking again for information on the department's voting rights enforcement. And these questions were asked by members during the 115th Congress, but were never answered. Will you commit to providing this information for this committee?
We try to respond to all the letters we receive from Congress. Obviously, February 1st was, I believe, only a week or so ago. I've kind of lost track of what day it is. But Yeah, I mean, we will look at that letter and we will respond consistent with the way we respond to requests from Congress. But I mean, these are important issues, and I share your concern about some of these places where there is alleged voter suppression, and I know that we are going to enforce the Voting Rights Act robustly, and we will continue. Again, if there is evidence, we should do that to our FBI and the people that enforce these laws, so we can properly predicate an investigation.
Well, thank you for that, because if you don't get answers, I promise you will keep asking. Another question that I have is, what steps did the department take to support election security efforts during the 2018 election? Specific efforts.
Are you talking about the actual voting devices?
Yes.
Or that the responsibility for the security of the voting devices and machines is actually the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security?
Can you tell this committee what those responsibilities were, those steps that were actually taken? Because I can tell you, there were many instances in Georgia, we saw over and over again, where people were not allowed to vote.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Again, if there's specific evidence that crimes have been committed, we would be very interested in that at the Department of Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Whitaker. Thank you for appearing before us here today. Your time as Acting Attorney General is near end. After that, you may or may not be working for Department of Justice or another position within the Trump administration, but there are, of course, several congressional investigations that involve yourself. And I want you here today to pledge that you will answer any Inspector General questions and cooperate fully with his investigations, even after you depart from your current position.
Are you talking about the DOJ Office of Inspector General?
Yes, the Justice Department Inspector General is currently considering several congressional requests for information and investigations that involve you. Since you'll be leaving this position soon, I want you to commit here today in front of this committee that you will answer the IG's questions and cooperate fully with those investigations.
I'm happy to commit to that. I will cooperate with the Inspector General. My is a fine DOJ career employee. I have the utmost respect for him. I think he's done exceptional work.
Thank you so much. The impact of the government shutdown on the functioning of the Department of Justice, the law enforcement functions, is it fair to say that the shutdown was devastating on the ability of the department to do their work?
The shutdown really was a difficult time at the Department of Justice because most of our employees are law enforcement and are accepted in their performance of their duties, and so they showed up every day like dedicated public servants and did their job, knowing that you here in Congress would ultimately pay them and come to some resolution of the shutdown.
I appreciate your recognition of that. I think every person up here in a bipartisan way would agree that the work of the rank and file members of the Department of Justice, FBI, the other law enforcement officials is outstanding. It seems appropriate that the department did issue a memorandum saying that during the time of the shutdown, the ancillary functions of the department that involve travel would be not allowed. Is that accurate?
I don't have that memo in front of me, but that is consistent with my understanding of our guidance in that regard.
On January 13, 2019, in the middle of the government shutdown, did you travel to give a speech to the Heritage Foundation?
Congressman, this is an important question, but I want to be very clear. I have 24/7 security detail that drives me everywhere. And so the term travel, I'm not sure what you mean. I went to Capitol Hill to give a speech to the Heritage Foundation, yes.
Okay. Would you consider that activity, a speech to the Heritage Foundation, to be an ancillary function of the department?
Congressman, again, I had no other way to get to a speech that I had committed to give before the shutdown.
The speech involved the topic of RFRA and the commemorate RFRA. In October 2017, during the time that you were Chief of Staff to the Attorney General, the Attorney General's office did issue guidance on federal law for religious liberty. The guidance involved expansion of exemptions to RFRA. At a religious liberty summit held in summer of 2018, Attorney General Sessions announced the formation of the Religious Liberty Task Force to further coordinate implementation of the guidance across the federal departments and agencies. It's fair to say that there's been limited public information on the task force and its work. The only public documentation is a 2-page memorandum issued establishing task force. Are you aware of any additional documents or guidance that further explain the task force mandate and processes?
No, I'm not familiar with any additional.
You know what the budget is of the task force?
I do not believe, as I sit here today, that we've actually effectuated the task force yet, and so I don't. It's going to be an internal task force that would come that would have no specific separate budget.
Will you commit that during the remaining time that your acting attorney general, to provide this committee any additional details regarding that task force, which has been in place now for I guess 7 months or more?
Yes, Congressman, I will be happy to follow up in writing with you or someone from the Office of Legislative Affairs about that Religious Liberty Task Force.
Recently, HHS interpreted the RFRA to allow a Christian-based foster care agency that does receive federal tax dollars to discriminate against potential foster parent because they happen to be Jewish. Do you know if the Justice Department stands behind this HHS determination that a taxpayer-subsidized organization can discriminate against a Jewish individual?
I am certain that the Department of Justice will defend that position of a sister agency.
It's another one.
Thank you very much.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Ms. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Whitaker, for agreeing to appear before us today.
So ridiculous.
And I'm delighted to hear of your department's focus on the scourge of gun violence, and so I look forward to your full endorsement and support for H.R. 8, the Universal Background Check Bill. Today you said a couple of things that really touched me. You said that you have to set the tone of the department, and you said that the job you are doing now is the honor of a lifetime. All of us here can quite imagine that. I believe that actually you do, as the head, as the acting AG, set the tone for the department. Tell me, and this is not a negative question, it is just a factual question, how many positions did you interview for with this administration prior to you going to the Department of Justice?
As we previously explored with one of your colleagues, I had interviewed preliminarily for the position that ultimately ICOM occupied, and then Emmett Flood, I think, currently occupies. And then I interviewed with General Sessions and some of his staff for the Chief of Staff job. So, in fact, I had never, after the election of 2016, I never intended to come into the administration. But I was happy to be asked, and I explored opportunities. Those are the two that I interviewed for.
And in the meantime, in your private life, you became a commentator on CNN and other places, and you disparaged the Mueller investigation. Is that true?
I used my experience as
Is it true? Yes or no?
No, I wouldn't characterize it as disparagement, no. I think I tried to explain to the American people when I was on CNN and other outlets how the process worked, how the process for appointment, how the process was...
No, I'm not asking you about process. I'm asking you about the subject and the investigation and the validity of the investigation. We know, the record is public, that you did say very negative things in your private life, and you have said today you're not willing to take those back, so they stand. Your thoughts on the Mueller investigation are fully public, and they stand because you did not take them back today. How did you learn of the extraordinary honor that was bestowed upon you? How did you learn you got the job?
I can't remember if it was which preceded which, but I believe I received a phone call from the President of the United States asking me to be the acting Attorney General.
A moment ago you said you learned by tweet. Did I misunderstand you?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay, so you learned first by a phone call from the President.
I believe so, but they were very close in time, and so I actually, as I sit here right now, I can't remember which preceded which.
How long
no.
was it just simply I'm letting you know of this, or was there substantive conversation about your role?
Well, I'm not going to discuss the private conversations I've had with the President. I think it's important that he is entitled to that confidentiality from a cabinet secretary, even acting like I am.
Okay,
I will tell you that it was not a substantive phone call.
It was an honor phone call, probably. And following that and the tweet, when did you next meet with the president about your job? Because it's during this time you have to decide. It's during this time, in that month or more, you have to decide whether or not to recuse. Am I right? So how many times did you meet with the president prior to your decision not to recuse?
Congresswoman, while I'm not going to discuss any meetings that I've had with the president or more conversations, I will tell you that I interact with the president on a regular basis, including after I was appointed acting Attorney General.
You said you set the tone for the entire department, and so you had to carefully consider whether or not to recuse yourself from any dealings
Yeah, I
with
spent
other.
5 weeks. I spent 5 weeks
determining that. And you got information from two sources that we know of. Career officials at the Justice Department recommended you recuse yourself to avoid the appearance of a conflict or bias. Is that correct? And that was on December 19th. To avoid even the appearance of a conflict or bias, based on your previous statements. Is that correct? Is that the advice you got?
Congresswoman,
It's a yes or no. Please, my time is
Congresswoman, I
running
would just
out.
point you to the
And I've
letter.
waited a long time. Please, it's a yes or no.
This question is not a yes or no question because you have to understand how it was my decision to make. Career ethics officials.
I'm not talking about your decision. I'm talking about the guidance that you received,
It
not
was
your
not my decision to make.
No. I'm asking you factually about the guidance you received. Career officials told you you should recuse to avoid even the appearance of an impropriety of bias, and you set the tone for your department. Am I correct?
Congresswoman, they told me it was a close call. They said it could go either way, and they said.
So to set the tone, you think on a close call, you go the other way?
As the Attorney General and not to find my successors, yes, I believe on a close call, as the Attorney General of the United States, that I made the right decision. It was my decision to make.
And yet you had career. I lost my time, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Oh.
Get this question out. I'll let him answer it. That'll be that.
Would you be able to provide us the written guidance that you got from the career professionals in terms of recusal? They recommended recusal. Would you please provide this committee that written document?
Congresswoman, that would require me to provide you internal deliberations that are not typically provided in this relationship, but I can tell you, as we sit here today, I did not receive any written advice from the career ethics officials.
Time of the gentlelady has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome. Ms. McCarslow-Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, I want to go back to your time when you worked for the Foundation for Accountability and Civil Trust. I worked for many, many years for various 501c3. So it's very interesting to me when I look